Following the opening address, we will have a keynote address from Professor Mitra. Professor Mitra is the president of the Board of Advisors of South Asia Democratic Forum, of our forum, and he is in Europe one of the key personalities that studied and followed more Tagore, and is exactly the person we could look for making this presentation. And we will have then a dance performance by Miss Kaberi Chatterjee, who has a doctorate in dance from the Visva Bharati University, and is a traditional Manipuri dancer and authority on the Tagore dance form. After that, you are all invited to stay with us for a reception that is being prepared right now. One of the persons that will not join us directly, but will be with us indirectly, is Dr. Hassan, Bangladeshi, that is member of our Board of Advisors. And he wrote me this morning with a lengthy poem that I think I will make a brief reference to. He started by reminding that Tagore was a great poet, musician, painter, educationist, and a reformer, but more than everything else, he was a great philosopher. That he was that kind of philosopher who broke classical tradition of philosophy and brought that to the downtrodden people of Bengal. He has reconstructed our psyche and given us a new identity. And the piece of the poem that I'm going to read, I think it is really something that is able to transmit a lot of the spirit of Tagore to our time, and so I would read it, not the whole of it, but what I consider to be more significant. No hope anywhere, no blossoming bud, only polluted air. Bitter and poisoned, all paradisal fruit, paradise only a shadow. No mantra, tantra or revealed world spreads a veneer of solace. Error is compounded on error. All civilized desires end in hopelessness. I have no words to express this futility. Where shall I hide my shame? Let's have purity, a purifying flame in the heart. A restless mighty arms, the speed of Shiva Nataraja. I want to drain the entire ocean. I want to rise like a mountain peak, embracing the water to my breasts. Dr. Hassan, 14th of November 2014, on the celebration of the Centenary, when Tagore himself received. It was attributed on the 13th, but the news came to him the next day on the 14th of November. This is the date that we chose to celebrate Tagore because this is the discovery by Europe of this great philosopher. So thank you, all of you, for being present. And now I shall give the floor for a keynote address for an opening address, to Her Excellency Isma Chan. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Paulo. Well, good evening, or rather good afternoon, I think. Looking outside, I felt it was already good evening. Aji hote shoto borsho pore কে তুমি পড়িছ বসে আমার কবিতা খানি কৌতূহল ভরে আজি হতে শতবর্ষ পরে 100 years from today who could you be, reading my poem under curiosity's sway 100 years from today? These are lines from Tagore's famous poem, Choddosho Shal, the Bangla year 1400. The poet was indeed keen to know who would be reading his works a century later. Obviously, his readers, his admirers, have not disappointed him. More than a century after he had written this beautiful piece, and exactly 100 years since he received the Nobel Prize, we are gathered here today to honor him, the first non-European Nobel laureate for literature, who had placed Bangla and the Bengali-speaking populace on the global platform, and who indeed enjoys a universal appeal. I thank Mr. Paulo Casaca, the Executive Director of South Asia Democratic Forum, for inviting me here. It's a great honor to have been asked to speak on Rabindranath Tagore. Well, it became known as Tagore, but it's originally Tagore. It is, however, quite an impossible task to try and pay tribute to Tagore, a versatile genius, especially within a defined time slot. I don't know how many minutes I have, Paulo. It is therefore no doubt a challenge which I accept gladly, but with all humility. How does one describe Tagore? Someone who was much ahead of his times. Although he's mostly revered as a poet, his contribution as a novelist, playwright, lyricist, philosopher, humanist, nationalist, as well as an artist, is well recognized. His literature covered a wide range of topics, from nature to patriotism, from social change to philosophical discourse. Tagore was thus clearly much ahead of his times, both in his writings and certainly in his thinking. During his lifetime, Tagore was celebrated within Bengal as a staunch nationalist, and globally as a source of mystical Eastern wisdom. A strong sense of linguistic nationalism grew around his writings, and his songs had then inspired the people to break off the shackles of the British colonial rule. He had the courage and patriotism to denounce the knighthood as a reaction to the mindless killings of hundreds of civilians in the Jallianwala Bagh massacre. Born in Kolkata, in the Indian subcontinent, he spent quite a significant number of years in Potishore, Shilaidaho, and Shahjatpur in the part of undivided Bengal, which is presently Bangladesh. Rabindranath continues to be one of the most passionate and staunch proponents of our Bengali identity. Just a little while ago, Professor Mitra and I were speaking about it. For Bangladesh, Tagore has been a predominant source of inspiration in all our national movements, starting from the mother language movement of 1952, which found ultimate culmination in the independence of Bangladesh in 1971. It was therefore apt that Bangladesh, on its independence, chose Tagore's song, Amar Sonar Bangla, Ami Tomai Bhalobashi, My Bengal of Gold, I Love You, as its national anthem. Notably, India's national anthem is also a Tagore song. Bengali speakers, whether in Bangladesh or in West Bengal of India, have often claim Tagore as almost uniquely theirs. But we do have a compromise. As for example, 2 years back, Tagore's 150th birth anniversary was jointly celebrated on both sides of the border with great enthusiasm. Rabindra Sangeet, as Tagore's songs are known, have a strong influence on our culture, on our tradition, on our ethos, and on our emotion, our entire being to speak of. Tagore thus remains very much close to the hearts of the people of Bangladesh. Every Bengali will know, or every Bangladeshi would know, at least some Tagore, even if he or she cannot or are not able to read or write. Even if it be simply the words coming from one of Tagore's well-known songs. My own introduction to Tagore came very early on in my life. My early memory of Tagore's songs and poetry is somewhat linked to the image of a long-playing record. You know the kind I am speaking of, the ones that had a photograph of a dog sitting in front of a huge gramophone with the words imprinted, his master's voice. Well, you may have well guessed my age. I've been around for some years, or at least half a century. At home, we had a good collection of Tagore's records, including 1 or 2 with Tagore's recitals in his own voice. My parents were avid admirers of Tagore, and therefore we siblings grew up constantly being familiarized with his works and his wisdom. And personally, I have drawn inspirations from his portrayal of women in society. I would therefore try to focus a little on Tagore's thoughts on women. I know all of you are looking forward to hearing the keynote speaker who would be giving his scholarly talks, but I would focus on Tagore's thoughts on women. I would not tire in repeating that Tagore was a thinker who was well ahead of his time. He's known to have dealt with every possible human emotions in his stories, and as well as in his songs. Many of Tagore's short stories had focused on the struggles of women. He had shown a profound understanding of women, their sensibilities, as well as their dilemmas in a patriarchal society, their innate struggle to bring about a societal change, while not totally being able to free themselves of the age-old prejudices that had long dictated their role in the family and in the society at large. Tagore has created female characters in his short stories, such as Nandini in Rakto Korobi, Sucharita in Gora, Bimola in Ghore Baire, and Ila in Char Odhyaye. These women remain as icons of invincible women, contrasting the stereotypes of traditional Bengali women. At the same time, Tagore was not oblivious of the many and varied complexities that women faced under the strains of poverty and patriarchy in a society bound by traditions. The story Strir Potro, which literally means a wife's letter, is a typical one which focuses on the trials and tribulations of women in traditional society. Mrinal, in her letter to her husband, narrates the many injustices imposed upon women in the traditional society, as well as the self-doubts that the women themselves endure in the process. She draws specific examples of what she herself has faced in her husband's extended family household, where the non-protesting husband had stood as a powerless, silent spectator, and thus becoming an accomplice of such injustices by default. In concluding the letter, Mrinal dares to inform her husband of her ultimate decision, that is, to leave him and carry on with a life entirely on her own. This was something totally unheard of during that time, and perhaps even now. Yet another Tagore's most subtle but strong portrayal of woman is in Noshtunir, the broken nest. This is an ill-fated love story where Tagore explores the emergence of the modern women by moving away from the traditional expectations of society. Feeling neglected by her husband, Charulata roams her vast household in loneliness until she discovers a companion in her brother-in-law, Omol. The love and fellow feeling between Omol and Charulata, born out of alienation, thrive because of a shared interest in literature. They write and read aloud to one another until both their works are published. This is exactly when their friendship flounders. Their romance is doomed, not as one would expect, because of its impossibility, or to say, near impossibility, but because neither can accommodate the other's passion for a world outside the one they have created together. When Charulata's husband, Bhupati, realizes his wife is in love with Omol, he decides to forgive her and offers a restart of life in togetherness. Charulata responds with one simple word, thak, never mind. Let it be. Here, Tagore decides not to allow for a reconciliation and weaken the female resolve. Even Satyajit Roy, the internationally renowned Bengali filmmaker who put so many of Tagore's stories on the big screen, avoided such a harsh ending. In the last scene of his adaptation, the camera catches the couple, Charu and Bhupati, the wife and the husband, reaching their hands towards one another. In his short story, Laboratory, written just few months before his death in 1941, Tagore expressed his latest views on women, urging them to find an identity of their own and to challenge conventions and to be in charge of decisions affecting not only their own lives, but also that of the larger society. We are indebted to Tagore for his recognition of women's empowerment and the absolute need for their emancipation. He wanted women to have their rights. In Shabola, Tagore reflected on the caged condition of women and asked, "Dear Lord, why wouldn't you let women have the right to sculpt their own fate?" Tagore was thus clearly much ahead of his times. His plays, including the dance dramas, also enjoy instant and universal appeal, focusing on a central female figure. Let's take, for example, Chondalika, story of an untouchable girl, which portrayed the stark reality of social disparity, prejudice, exploitation, and the constant and universal search for love and happiness. This makes Chondalika, which was written in 1933, most relevant even today. Shama, story of a court dancer who falls in love with a foreign merchant who is falsely imprisoned by the royal court and faces execution unless a male admirer of Shama takes upon him the very allegation the merchant is charged of. The story, the dance drama, speaks of intrigues, of selfless love, and dilemmas. Chitrangoda, yet another dance drama, is based on a woman-oriented story from the epic Mahabharata, where the mythic princess, who is brought up as a son to rule the kingdom of Manipur, falls in love with the great warrior Arjun and begs God to transform her into a feminine beauty. The dance drama is about love. It's about illusion. It's about conquest. And it explores the inner complexities of the human psyche, a woman's identity, her position in the society, and a search for true love. Modern in his thinking, Tagore is valued as a profound thinker and a deeply spiritual man, while he rejected the narrow confines of religion itself. In one of his poems, he states that, and I quote, "God exacts the best of a man through sorrow, as the best of an incense is brought out through burning," end of quote. While respecting the wisdom of age and the past, Tagore emphasized a new way of thinking in addressing the upcoming challenges in the ever-changing world. He maintained that promoting one's culture and approving the cultures of others could be one and the same attitude. He wrote that the unity of human civilization can be better maintained by linking up in fellowship and cooperation of the different civilizations of the world. More than anything, as a social thinker and educationist, what Tagore stood for was a synthesis of East and West. A collection of Tagore's English translations, the 100 or so poems that became the anthology Gitanjali, or songs offerings, has been translated in many languages. No translation, according to Bengalis, I should say, lives up to the job. As someone has aptly commented, and let me quote, the translations of Tagore's are like embroidery seen from the back. So it's not really perfect. It's beautiful, but not perfect. In his vision of globalization and universalism, he had stated, "Where the mind is without fear, where the head is held high, where knowledge is free, where the world has not been broken up into fragments by narrow domestic walls." Tagore, therefore, not only belonged to the world that he lived in, but is also relevant in the world that we are in and our future generations will be in. I believe we should strive to carry on his legacy not only through symbolic remembrance, but through our actions. This is the best tribute that we can possibly pay to him. Once again, I thank Sadef, Paolo and his team, mainly Ekaterina, I don't know if she's here, for organizing this commemoration event. And I also thank you all for your attention, and I really wish success of this event. Thank you very much.
There is something I did not tell you just a while ago. Ismat is as well a representative in the Commission for the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women of the United Nations. I think you all understood you have been in front of one of the leading women that think about women in Bangladesh and elsewhere. I was taken by surprise when she addressed me on the issue of the conditions of Portuguese women in Andorra with a concern and a humanity that I think it's a symbol of the Tagore that we have to learn about here in Europe. I was really overwhelmed by your magnificent presentation. I think that we will certainly use the records because they are sublime. And now, I would say the soul of SADF, the man to whom I owe much of what I know on South Asia, a distinguished professor, a Bengali, an Indian, a European that is a French citizen that lived perhaps most of his life in the United Kingdom, that is a German professor, and he is everywhere. He knows about a lot of things, but he is mainly a humanist, a poet, and a very, very dear friend. Professor Subrata Mitra, it's really a very big honor to have you here. We are really delighted to hear you on one of your main specialities. Tagore, please, the floor is yours.
Begum Ismat Jan, the respected ambassador of Bangladesh, Mr. Paulo Kazaka, the executive director and founder of the South Asia Democratic Forum, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, friends. Thank you so very much for giving me an opportunity to address you on this auspicious occasion, I would say in Bengali, dignified occasion for all of us. I owe a special vote of thanks to the ambassador for not only telling us about the multifaceted personality of Tagore, but of reminding me how it was on Epar Bangla. In Bengali we say Bengal of that side, meaning Bangladesh, Bengal of this side, which is our side, and reminding me of how it used to be to have those 78 LP records and the HMV gramophone that you'd crank up. That's what our childhood was like. And you have just shown how poetry can bring people who are divided otherwise. I must stop there because the joy I'm talking about is a personal joy of a Bengali. It's a parochial joy. It does not explain at all why we should pull together three absolutely different parameters: a quintessential Bengali poet, the South Asia Democratic Forum, which is a small group of fanatics for the cause of welfare, identity, dignity of South Asia. These are people who do other things to earn a living, but who live for a shared ideal, South Asia, and Brussels, the bureaucratic heart of Europe. What brings them together? And why does Tagore serve as that link? That is what I had in mind when Paulo came to see me in my study in Heidelberg. After all, that's how it all started. I decided that academia without advocacy is sterile, and an NGO without any link with theory is mere advocacy. So we thought South Asia Institute and the SADF should have a permanent bond. So Paulo comes and we talk about the ceremony. And I said, but why should we inflict our Tagore on such kind but unsuspecting people. That's what I thought. But didn't we find in Tagore answers to many of the questions that the South Asia Democratic Forum is posing? It's about what to do with modernity. Modernity, which Europe invented about 200 years ago in terms of technology so that nature can be tamed, ravished, dominated by man. The modern state so that society and all vulnerable parts of society could be dominated by that modern Westphalian state, and modernity with its limited horizon of the here and now. That's something we are struggling with, we are trying to find a way out of, and it occurred to me that there was this man who had thought about it well before his time. And he had thought not just about his native Bengal, he had thought about a much wider world, a world not just of now or yesterday, but a world of tomorrow. So I thought, this prophet who helps us master the malaise of modernity, not by becoming a revivalist, going back to some pure golden age somewhere, but looking beyond. That prophet of the postmodern is what brings us together. My hope is to convince you not just to be party to an applause to someone who won the Nobel Prize in Literature for Asia for the first time 100 years ago. It's a politically correct thing to do. But that's not what I'm after. I want you to see why Tagore is not just evocative of the postmodern, but he's also you. He's not just me. He's not just the ambassador. He's all of us. And that message, I thought we would go over in terms of a life which is not dissociated from work, and works which are not just literature, poetry, painting, education, but also politics, and a philosophy which reaches out beyond the narrow frontiers of nationalism. After all, not many, at the height of India's struggle for independence, could simultaneously give up a knighthood which the British gave to recognize the Nobel Prize, but also to stand up to Gandhi, saying, thus far and no further. And Gandhi retaliates by saying, you are our sentinel, otherwise we'll get drunk with the power of nationalism and Swadeshi. For that, we have to think about Tagore in terms of three key questions. This prophet of the transcultural, the hybrid, and the flow of culture and things. A spirit who is quintessentially Bengali, but you will see in his painting, in his music, in his education, he's reaching out, reaching beyond these national modes and is creating something new, a new form which was not recognized in his own time. Today, we hero worship Tagore, but in his own time, he was vigorously criticized by the Bengal school of painters, saying, these are just doodles, these are just etching, that's not real painting, or real music, or real dance. Similarly, here is someone who is talking not only in terms of the local, but also in terms of the global. And then, here is someone who finds the ultimate answer to power. You all know what is power. Power is the power of A over B. Power of A to stop B from doing what B would like to do, or get B to do what B rather not do, like the power of the speaker to hold the audience until I'm through. Of course, power of the powerless is insufferable. Power of the power is insufferable to the powerless anywhere, so you have to have a reason. That's the C. In this case, it's only correct and good manners to stay seated while one is speaking. But poet Tagore finds a much better answer, which is to submit to poetry so that you can be a lot more of yourself. Tagore reaches out to all, and he just makes me feel good about myself. That is the ultimate answer to power. What I have designed is not enough to hear about Tagore. You have to hear Tagore in his manifold ways. So I'll ask Ekaterina to come and join me, because we are going to perform some music for your benefit. It's not well known that Tagore wrote the national anthem of India, Jana Gana Mana Adhi. He also wrote the national anthem of Bangladesh and gave the music to the national anthem of Sri Lanka. I chose the national anthem of Bangladesh because it's in Bangladesh that the legacy of Tagore has gone to the highest pinnacles. After all, Bangladesh was created through the Bhasha Andolon, through the language movement, where people gave up their lives to fight for the dignity of speaking in their own mother tongue as a national language. And in Bangladesh, political science is taught in Bangla. And the music that hopefully you'll hear is evocative, deeply evocative of the spirit that runs through Tagore. Will you please join and stand up? This is the national. Thank you. Thank you very much. The spirit that runs through this national anthem, the spirit of peace, love, and transcendence, I've tried to sum up in a paragraph, which I'll read out. This handout is actually available. The whole idea of making a handout was for you also to have an access to the literature that I'll be drawing on. In the handout, I'm saying, poet, musician, painter, educationist, and philosopher, Rabindranath Tagore for all of us, born in India, 1861 to 1941, belongs to all ages and people everywhere. The global prophet of the postmodern, Tagore had reached out to the whole world beyond the narrow confines of nationalism with a poet's uncanny sense of the transcultural. Transcultural means stuff which is out there, which has not yet been plundered by high culture, the sensations, which only someone of his sensitivity could identify. Tagore had lovingly celebrated the joys of everyday life and given voice and dignity to the oppressed in his poetry, stories, music, and philosophy. With a vision of the true cosmopolitan, Tagore had brought inspiration from across the world to bear on his creative arts, pedagogy, and teaching. A citizen of the world before the concept of globalization, which has become now a cliché, Tagore had remained firmly anchored to the everyday life of his beloved Bengal, which gave his voice its powerful authenticity. Globalization today has somehow given us to understand that you can belong everywhere, and people forget that you can belong everywhere only if you belong somewhere. The power of the locality is what gives him authenticity, and he transcends it by reaching out to other people's localities. That is the multiplex character of his authentic globalization. To the world today, chafing at the limitations of power politics, the oppressive confines of the nation state, dogmas of terror and hatred, some people who are also unhappy with the modern world reach back to a mythical tradition, and that expresses itself in terms of violence and terror. Here is someone who is also critical of the modern world, but he is reaching beyond it. He wants to have it both ways. He would have the electricity and the air conditioning, but he would ask, yeah, but how about tomorrow? How shall we be brothers? How shall we be together? And material progress as the only motor to move corporations and individuals alike, and yet, not sure of how to transcend these, the teachings of Tagore show the way forward. Tagore is both timely and timeless. The celebration of Tagore's legacy is also an invitation to all of us to make it our own, regardless of where and in which social echelon one is placed, and promote it so that one may bloom where one is planted. He's not a missionary. He would want the artist, the housewife, the student to remain what they are, only a little bit more. The ambassador has already gone over most of the main events of Tagore's life, so I will simply emphasize a few points so that we can have more time to enjoy the dance, which is the only form that I have not covered in my presentation. What I would like you to appreciate is that Tagore, like many people of his generation and his aristocrat, born to a landed family, the estates were what is now Bangladesh, and that's how he's sent abroad to Sussex. He finds education of the formal kind joyless. I'll talk more about it later. And he's given into an arranged marriage, as it was de rigueur in his time. But he comes back from England and releases his first series of poems, Manashi, and very important, he continues his exploration of various forms of art and social engagement. In 1890, when he's publishing his first series of poems, he's only 29. And eventually, his travels will take him all over the world, and the first non-European to win the Nobel Prize of Literature for Gitanjali, the Song of Offerings. We will continue with his life. The next port of call, important port of call for me, is 1928. At the age of 67, Tagore had always done a bit of etching. He will seriously start painting. There will be about 2,000 paintings. And in some of those paintings, you will see later, what later Freudian analysis would call the projection of the subconscious and the unconscious. And that is where you'll see the dilemma of power and gender. And with the courage that only a man of his conviction could have, he projects his own inner dilemmas to his painting and to his writing. we will continue with the poetry. One has to take into account that not all of it has been rendered into English, but the most acclaimed of them, Gitanjali, is available, and that contains many other poems besides the namesake offering of songs. And another peculiarity of Tagore are dramas, but also set to music. We don't have any here today to play to you, but you'd find in the space of poetry and drama not naturalism, not social advocacy, but beauty of its own unique kind. We have already learned from the ambassador, in addition to poetry, music, there are also other works, particularly short stories. The short story form, a modern form, not popular, is popularized by Tagore, and some of the main stories, Bhikarini or Sadhana, bunch of stories, also includes one which I don't have on the PowerPoint. The ambassador will know, some of you might have known. It's called Kabuliwala, very evocative story. And today, when SADF is so concerned and engaged with Afghanistan, I remind them that Afghanistan was also present in Kolkata in the form of this kindly loan shark, the man from Kabul. And beautiful story, evocative story, where you see the love that could unite this unshaven man and a little Bengali girl. We have already heard about the novels, so I'll skip those. I'll go into the painting now. I've already mentioned that Tagore's paintings were born from Tagore's writings. When you look at the facsimile copies of the manuscripts, you'll find, well, those are days before word processing. So when you write, and you've got the wrong word, and you're looking for the mot juste, Tagore would strike it off, and after striking it off, he'll start doodling, and the doodling will become another expression of the inner conflict that nourished and nurtured his poetry. You will find among contemporaries, including Jamini Roy, who is a friend of Tagore, who is teaching Indian art, these women with large eyes, great consternation, how to classify these doodles. Is it real art? So the first recognition of Tagore's paintings come from the West. And the successful exhibition of his many works, which made a debut appearance in Paris upon encouragement by artists he met in the south of France, these were held throughout Europe, and you'd find a combination of shapes, colors, red, green color, resulting in works, and that exhibited the strange color schemes and offbeat aesthetics. The poster we have here is first exhibited in the Mairie de Paris, and one finds there influences by scrimshaw from Northern Ireland, Haida carvings from British Columbia, and woodcuts by Max Pechstein. And some of Tagore's lyrics corresponded in a synthetic sense with these particular paintings. I will draw your attention to one of them. Watch her eyes. What's the power in those eyes? And the text I'm using, and this is also on the handout that I have, gives us a clue to what is this painting about. Tagore has a young man and not yet married, and he's very close to his sister-in-law. And this proximity, which the ambassador has already invoked, well, let's put it this way. Some call it platonic, some call it erotic, is peculiarly Tagore. And in the superb film of Satyajit Ray, one has a portrayal of it. When Tagore is given in marriage, the sister-in-law, Kadambari, commits suicide. And later, much later, Tagore would write a poem called Rahu Prem. Rahu is a mythical monster which sometimes swallows the moon. That's when an eclipse takes place. This is how it goes. I am your companion from the beginning of time, for I am your own shadow. In your laughter, in your tears, you shall sense my dark self hovering over you, now in front, now behind. At the dead of the night, when you are lonely and dejected, you'll be startled to find how near I am seated by you, gazing into your face. Wherever you turn, I am there. My shadow sweeps over the sky and covers the earth. My piteous cry and my cruel laughter echo everywhere, for I am hunger never appeased, thirst never quenched. I am always there, a dagger in your breast, a poison in your mind, a disease in your body. I shall chase you like a terror in the day, like a nightmare in the night, like a living skeleton in a famine. I shall stretch my hand before you and pester you to give and give and give. Like a thorn, I shall prick you day and night. Like a curse, I shall haunt you. Like fate, I shall follow you. As night follows day, as fear follows hope. Now, I want you to pull together these lines and the subconscious conflict between a desire that could never be fulfilled. Next comes, whose desire for whom? The unexpressed desire of the married Bengali woman for the bright, handsome brother-in-law, or the lasting of this brother-in-law for the older woman, or that which must remain unacquitted, because that reality is a supra-reality that's beyond all of us. So when Tagore paints, that is why you'll find all Tagore's women are stronger than the men. All of them, see those powerful eyes, all of them express their unrequited desires, their unacknowledged powers in their eyes. And in each of them, you find the men weak, is the women who lead. That is where you find the empathy, way before its time, of a kind of empowerment which is not feminist. Tagore wants his women to be women, but empowered by their femininity, like Durga, rising above men as well as women. You find the same motives in the films that have been made out of some of Tagore's stories, and many of them have been set to film by Satyajit Ray, again trained, educated in the Tagore school, Shantiniketan. Charulata is the film that the ambassador talked about, and that is the lady, Kadambari, in the story, Charu in the film that we are talking about. And Kabuliwala has also been made into a film, and a wonderful film. Then there are the three women, Tinkonna. But I would like you now to turn to something, you don't have to sit back and enjoy. This is another song, a completely different kind, also a Tagore song. Tagore, by the way, also is hybridizing and producing his own musical school. Tagore finds himself in Argentina, and there is this lady, an aristocratic lady, who takes him in along with his companion. And later, Tagore, in that memory, writes this poem You go, what do I do? Do you press it? It goes like this. This is Tagore at his most playful. The princess I dream of lives across 7 seas. Thanks very much. Thank you. Now that we have seen the joyful facet of Tagore, let me bring you to yet another aspect of this protein genius. When it comes to education, we have in Tagore one of the earliest discoverers of the natural and innate in man, women, children, which should be allowed to express. I mean, those who know the Waldorf system know something about it. Remember, Tagore came back from England without a degree, and we find in the biography I'm using from Krishna Datta an explanation. In what he hated most about formal education was the system's monotony and its alienation from life and nature, its utilitarianism, its emphasis on English, virtually excluding the mother tongue, and most of all, its joylessness. What Tagore did was to experiment with teaching which should help express the inner potential of person in ways that would not constrain the creativity. In that sense, he's a pioneer in the field of education. For the last 40 years of his life, he was content to be a schoolmaster in humble rural surroundings, even when he had achieved fame such as no Indian had known before. He was one of the first in India to think out for himself and put in practice principles of education which have now become commonplace in educational theory, if not yet in practice. I've been to Shantiniketan. I have seen this little school for children, which eventually became a world university called Vishwabharati, a center for Indian culture, a seminary for Eastern studies, and a meeting place of the East and the West. The poet selected for its motto an ancient Sanskrit verse, Jatra Vishwam Papatika Nidam, which means where the whole world meets in a single nest. Way before his time, Tagore had reached out to China and had Professor Tanchung's father, Tanchung taught us Chinese in Delhi University, as a main influence on the life of Shantiniketan, his experimental university. Vishwabharati represents India, where she has her wealth of mind, which is for all. Vishwabharati acknowledges India's obligations to offer to others the hospitality of her best culture and India's right to accept from others their best. India has a right to accept from others what is their best. So you don't find here, unlike in Gandhi, a kind of rejectionism of the West. He is someone who is pulling together both the East and the West, a little like, imagine, a four-handed piano recital. It would not be complete without the other. It's this complementary character you find in Vishwabharati way before it would be fashionable in the teaching not just of Chinese, but also of French and German. And a desire to let students not only go through formal education, but play with clay modeling, gardening, agriculture, and small industry, doing little things which would be useful. So you don't find here a kind of narrow rejectionism and a synthesis and hybridization of many different modes and forms. In 1940, a year before he died, he put a letter in Gandhi's hand. Vishwabharati is like a vessel which is carrying the cargo of my life's best treasure, and I hope it may claim special care from my countrymen for its preservation. I'll not embarrass Paulo by telling him that I find something Tagore-like in the whole idea of the SADF. There was no national grant for this little school, which then becomes his experimental university. Sick, ailing, old, Tagore would go all over the world to lecture and demand a fee. His Nobel Prize, all of this money goes into the funding of this experiment. So that Shantiniketan is much more than just an institution, it's a movement. And this movement will attract many people. It's not a part of the political movement just for India's freedom. It's much bigger than India's freedom. It's more for the freedom of the soul from the enslavement to modernity. That's where we come to Tagore's politics and his philosophy. Think of Tagore's time. Tagore's time is the height of colonial rule, and the British are not in India for a picnic. Many of you might have heard about a massacre called Jallianwala Bagh, where in a sort of walled garden, a meeting takes place, and the British soldiers open fire on these people as they're coming out after the meeting, and most of them were killed, simply trampled. And that is the kind of background in which Tagore is writing. I mean, when you hear this, if you're a patriotic Indian, you would reach out for a bomb or a revolver or a knife or something lethal. And in Tagore, there is an absolute refusal to be taken in by terrorism. He does return the knighthood that the British gave, but his motto would be, he hasn't said it, I'm putting words into his mouth, good writing, good painting, good work is the best revenge. So, bloom where you are planted is how Tagore's philosophy would go. But that's not the mainstream. The national mainstream is with Mahatma Gandhi. So, on the one hand, Tagore opposed imperialism and supported Indian nationalists, and these views were first revealed in Manushi, which was mostly composed in his 20s. So he has been with his nationalist sentiments right from the beginning. But when Swadeshi, which means basically you should only consume what your country produces, so there will be bonfires of imported clothes. And that is when Tagore thinks it's going a little overboard, because one could reject the baby with the bathwater. Think of the EU, think of all these narrow nationalisms, and you're trying to create a much larger identity. Where is the balance then between narrow sectarian nationalism and the larger mode? Tagore thought Gandhi is unleashing Swadeshi such a way that India would lose the enlightenment of the West, which has come, which has made India something like a larger identity beyond Hindus and Muslims and Sikhs, Bengalis and Orias and Punjabis, that one might reject that enlightenment which has come from the West. So he lampooned the Swadeshi movement, he rebuked it in The Cult of the Charkha. In an acrid 1925 essay, he urged the masses to avoid victimology. Don't think of yourself as a poor victim. Rise, get empowered internally. And instead, seek self-help and education. And he saw the presence of British administration. I mean, why is India colonized? Why are 150,000 British men, women, children ruling over 300 million Indians with very little overt force? Because one has lost something internally. So he's saying, don't plead, don't behave like victims. Become empowered internally. And it's this political symptom of that inner defeat which explains why the British are here. And he maintained that even for those at the extremes of poverty, there can be no question of blind revolution. Cutting the throat of the rich man might feed you for a day. It will not feed you always. Think of agriculture. Those days when most Indians were going to Britain, he sent his son to the United States to do what? To learn agriculture. Because that is where the food will come from. So narrow revolution, blind hatred will not do it. You need a multiplex awakening of the soul of industry, of culture. And preferable to it was a steady and purposeful education. So education, 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 and not just of the formal kind, but all kinds, including the arts, the fine arts. Naturally, a person like this attracted attention, not only of the British, but also of terrorists who did not find Tagore's message soothing. He escaped assassination only narrowly by Indian expatriates during his stay in a San Francisco hotel in late 1916. The plot failed when the would-be assassins fell into an argument. Must have been Bengalis. I don't know who they were. Tagore wrote songs lionizing the Indian independence movement. Two of Tagore's more politically charged compositions, one of them you will see soon, Chitta Jetha Bhaya Shunno, Where the Mind is Without Fear, and Ekla Cholore, If they answer not in the to thy call, walk alone, gained mass appeal, with the latter favored by Gandhi. Though somewhat critical of Gandhian activism, Tagore was key in resolving a Gandhi-Ambedkar dispute involving separate electorates for untouchables, thereby mooting at least one of Gandhi's fasts unto death. I'll take a couple of minutes again to put you in the context. There is no one monolithic Indian national movement. The mainstream is led by Gandhi, but there is fear that Gandhi's liberalism might deliver independence, but it might deliver independence in terms of power to the majority of Indians who are Hindus. And not just Hindus, they are Hindu upper caste men. What happens to untouchables? What happens to Muslims? So the mainstream is constantly in the danger of splitting into factions. That's where Tagore steps in from time to time, uniting, fighting Gandhi when Gandhi becomes too narrow, but at the same time standing by Gandhi when Gandhi is isolated. Gandhi is horribly isolated on the eve of India's independence. The British have decided that India could be independent only if India is divided on the grounds of religion, so that Pakistan will become the home to India's Muslims and the rest will be the home of those who would not go away to Pakistan. Terrific, violent riots erupt all over areas which have been partitioned. And Noakhali, then in East Pakistan, now Bangladesh, Gandhi finds himself isolated. Gandhi did not want partition, and Gandhi is trying to preach communal harmony, telling Muslims not to kill Hindus, because Hindus are being killed in what becomes East Pakistan, and Muslims are being killed in Bihar. And Gandhi is preaching communal harmony. And there is no police force to protect him. A man like that would be the first victim of the assassin's bullet. It eventually happens. But in Noakhali, Gandhi does manage to pull together Muslims to protect Hindus. And here, Tagore comes up with a song which has become a motto of many of us. It goes like this: Ekla chalo re, ekla chalo, ekla chalo, ekla chalo re, jodi tor dak shune keu na ase tabe, ekla chalo re. If no one responds to you, listen to the drum in your head and in your heart and keep marching alone. That synthesizer, that unifier, is also intervening to, like when the Hindu majority decides that they will have power and they will not give a guaranteed representation to untouchables, Gandhi goes on a fast unto death, and it's Tagore who then brokers this peace between Gandhi and the spokesperson of untouchables, and that Gandhi-Ambedkar understanding would then again go back to the intervention of Tagore. A letter from Tagore to Gandhi deserves to be read out because we find here an acute mind. I mean, sometimes, Tagore with those looks, the beard, the long robe, is taken as a mystic. And that's the wrong thing to do. Edward Said, the Lebanese professor from New York, gave it a name. It's called Orientalization. When you see a man of peace preaching like, you automatically think of him as an Eastern mystic. And the moment you have thought it, you have lost him, because he then becomes the other, sort of the rational self and the irrational other. And then you start thinking of non-Western cultures as different. What we have to remember is that underneath this long robe is an astute mind who is reaching out to his own people in terms of what is good in the other, and to the other in terms of what is good in the self. So here you have a third space beyond the self and the other. And he's not doing it only to Gandhi, to Ambedkar. He's doing it to all kinds of people who settle down for the narrowness of sectarian identities. Here is Tagore. I feel compelled to utter a truism in asserting that physical catastrophes have their inevitable and exclusive origin in certain combinations of physical facts. We, who are immensely grateful to Mahatma Ji, Ji is a suffix of respect to Mahatma Gandhi, for inducing by his wonder-working inspiration, freedom from fear and feebleness in the minds of his countrymen, feel profoundly hurt when any words from his mouth may emphasize the elements of unreason in those very minds. Unreason, which is a fundamental source of all the blind powers that drive us against freedom and self-respect. Remember, I mentioned right at the outset that Tagore has found the answer to power. The answer to power is not in more power. The answer to power is not in powerlessness. The answer to power is a unique form of transcendence when one looks beyond the narrow confines of the self, of that egoistic self. When one is able to put oneself in the skin of the other. And that is then the lasting message of Tagore, with which I will bring this conversation to an end. And that is the Nobel Prize winning song. And its first line, the ambassador has already read it out to you, and I'll repeat. Where the mind is without fear and the head is held high, chitta jetha bhashunno utto jetha shir, where knowledge is free, where the world has not been broken up into fragments by narrow domestic walls, where words come out from the depths of the truth, where tireless striving stretches its arm towards perfection, where the clear stream of reason has not lost its way into the dreary desert sand of dead habit, where the mind is led forward by thee unto the ever-widening thought and action. Into that heaven of freedom, my Father, let my country awake. Tagore's message is not only to Bengalis or to Indians or to South Asians. It's a message to all of us, wherever we are, whatever we are, whoever we are with. The message is, listen to your inner music and walk alone if nobody else is following you. They will come sometime. And that message, ladies and gentlemen, is timeless and timely for the world we live in. And my hope is that when you go away from here, you will remember not just that Tagore, but a Tagore in you, wherever you are. Thank you very much.
I think I am a little less ignorant than I was 1 hour before. I was overwhelmed by your lesson. It's not the first time I had the opportunity of listening to your absolutely brilliant mind, but I think here you really went to the whole of the philosophy that is behind all our work. We started by thinking of SADF as a way to see to what extent South Asia could take on board some of the lessons of the European construction. I'm getting to the conclusion that we'd better think of South Asia and Tagore and some of the brightest and better successes of Tagore, like the two we just heard, as the inspiration for the rebirth of Europe that we are very much in need of. I was absolutely, I think it was the best ever realization we ever promoted, SADF. We did not finish yet. We are having a dance performance. We will have to wait some minutes for everything to be set and to be prepared. As I announced you in the beginning, it will be Mrs. Kaberi Chatterjee that will give us the honor of knowing a bit of the dance performance from Tagore. We will have to change a bit the computers and the set. So just allow us for a few minutes. Okay. Yes. Please go ahead. Thank you. Obi Chatterjee is going to be the presenter. He is someone we have been cooperating with in several circumstances. He was already present in our late initiative with Konrad Adenauer Stiftung. And at the time, he presented one of the most important features of Tagore, exactly the issue of water. I'm sorry not to have presented you here, but he has been already part of the family. So I'm now getting out of stage, and please, the stage is now yours.
So we'll begin with a song and a dance. Sorry. Okay. Yeah. So, I'll just raise this slightly. No, this was not. This one is not working. Okay. Maybe I can do this. Well, we've heard already, and this is the slight risk of coming at the end of some very excellent speakers who have been telling you all about Tagore. But we are going to talk specifically about the artistic side of Tagore. And he grew up in Jorasanko, where he was also born, surrounded by literature, painting, music, and theatre. Some of his brothers set up their own private theatre there. As we've seen from Professor Mitra's presentation, in 1878, Rabindranath's father sent him to study in England. Well, the reason why he came back is shrouded in some slight mystery, because he was called back to India after a year and a half. One of the explanations is that his fairly conservative father discovered that Rabindranath Tagore had taken a greater interest in social dances than in law, which he was supposed to be studying. So Rabindranath returned to Jorasanko in 1880 at the age of 19. And he found that his elder brother, Jyotirindranath, had written a play called Manmohi. Rabindranath wrote a song for the play, which was suitable for a group dance by the actors and actresses. He went on to choreograph the dance based on the social dances he had learned in England. This was the birth of the Tagore dance form. Rabindranath had begun setting his own words to music at the age of 16. Initially, he used the tunes of the Indian classical songs he had learned in his childhood. Soon, he started to experiment with variations of his own. To the Indian classical tunes, he added notes which would be regarded as taboo by the purists. In his view, these notes would enrich the expression of his lyrics. As well as poetry, Rabindranath also wrote several plays, some of which incorporated songs based on his poetry. By the late 1800s, he was well known in his native Bengal. And as we've seen, in December 1901, he founded the school at Shantiniketan. He wanted it to be in the model of an ancient Indian tapovana, or hermitage. He wanted it to be close to nature, to create an almost family-like atmosphere, and for the students to achieve higher truth. Rabindranath initially traveled to raise money for the school. And as we've also seen from Professor Mitra's presentation, after winning the Nobel Prize, he received invitations from all over the world. Now, through his travels, he learned various musical styles, but combined them to create his own tunes. For him, the words of his lyrics were the most important. In order to enhance their beauty, he even created his own rhythms to match the rhythms of his lyrics. The development of the Tagore dance form was similar in many ways to the development of Tagore songs. However, it was only in the late 1920s that Tagore gave more attention to it. This was partly because Tagore had first to establish dance as a respected art form in Bengal. During the 19th century, the reputation of dance had fallen dramatically, so that it was associated more with prostitution than with an art form. It was unthinkable for any dance to be performed by the children of decent people. When he first included dance as one of the subjects in the Shantiniketan curriculum, he explained to outsiders that the pupils were exercising to drum rhythms. Rabindranath had to overcome considerable resistance to establish dance as a respectable art. to be seen on stage in theatres by middle-class intellectual Bengalis. We should acknowledge Tagore's contribution to dance, not only for his unique Tagore dance form, but also for this social revolution. He wrote a play called Notir Puja, The Dancing Girl's Prayer, where he added a dance by Noti. During his travels, Rabindranath began to identify elements from different dance forms, including those from outside India, which he thought could help overcome the linguistic barrier between his words and his non-Bengali audiences. Tagore went on to use dance to express the inner meaning of his poetry. With the help of students and teachers at his school in Shantiniketan, he took elements from different dance styles and refined them to create his own very distinctive style. Tagore felt very strongly about the importance of expressing thoughts and feelings in physical movement. For example, he had observed that his adopted granddaughter, aged 2.5, tries to speak to me with the whole of her body. Meeting me on the boat, she expressed her delight in the form of a dance of her own design. As she danced, her speech was through her whole body. Life is sweet, she wanted to say. The world is beautiful. But having as yet no language of words, her small mind, stirred to its depths, broke out into a complex movement of dance. Her whole body moved as if to music. It is a function of the body, not merely to carry out vital actions so that we live and move, but so that we may express, and not with the face alone, but with the legs, the arms, and the hands. This explains why Rabindranath placed greater emphasis in his dance form on the whole body movement, rather than the intricate details of some dance forms which focus on, for example, facial expressions or hand gestures. Gabari will now perform the choreography Rabindranath devised for his poem Julon, Swinging. The poem is recited for us by Supriya Tagore, a great grandnephew of Rabindranath Tagore. We should mention that Rabindranath was not a dancer himself, although he had danced some steps while acting in plays. However, what he was an all-round artist. As a result, he had no difficulty in devising choreography. Of course, in contrast with his songs, where he composed the music to which he set his words, the situation is slightly different for the dances. He had to rely on the students at his own school and various teachers at the school who had come from different parts of the world. For individual dances, he would devise the choreography with their help. His daughter-in-law, Pratima Devi, and Shantidev Ghosh were particularly closely involved in this creative process. Different steps are combined in such a way that it is difficult to identify their origin just by watching the Tagore dance. That was Rabindranath's own unique creation. The costume design, hairstyle, and makeup were all devised by Rabindranath with the help of Pratima Devi. Although Rabindranath wrote musical notations for the songs he composed, there is no equivalent for the dance choreographies he created. He relied upon the steps being handed down from teachers to students, and then on to their students, and so on. The choreography for the Tagore dances Gabri performs were all learned in this way from her dance teachers at Shantiniketan, and particularly Shubhra Tagore. Gabri will conclude this introduction to the Tagore dance form with Tomar Ananda, your joy.
I think we couldn't have a better way of ending our Tagore celebrations than with this magnificent dance. Kaberi and Hobby, thank you so much for this wonderful performance. I think we really had the best ever realization of SADF. I do not know if we will ever do something better. I hope we will be able to count with your cooperation, your friendship, and that we will be able to transmit this Tagore spirit into Europe. I think we are very, very badly in need of this spirit among us, because I think it will contribute tremendously for the future of Europe, and I think of the whole humanity. Thank you so much to all. We will now have a reception that we will certainly use to speak a bit more about Tagore and everything else. We certainly will put this tape in a prominent place in our site, and I really think it is an historical landmark what was done today. I'm very, very thankful. Ismat, Subrata, and to both of you, thank you so much, and please enjoy the evening. Bye-bye.